Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. A very warm welcome to you from wherever in the world you are today. I'm just going to very briefly run through a quick agenda for today. We will start off very shortly. I'll hand over to my colleague Raal Harris, who will begin a series of introductions into today's speakers. Following that, we'll take a look at key inspection criteria, some common challenges and pitfalls experienced, best practices for positive inspection results, communication and collaboration, training and e-learning strategies, e-learning bundles, and we will, of course, have time for questions and answers at the end. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll look to tackle as many of those as we can during the very last sort of 10 to 15 minutes of the session. If for some reason we don't get to answer every question, we will make sure that we follow up afterwards with an answer for you. So following that, I will just hand over to my colleague Raal Harris, Chief Creative Officer here at Ocean Technologies Group.
Thanks, James. And hello, everybody, and good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. It's always a pleasure to have so many of you turn up to our webinars. So they're always a slightly different focus, and today's we're really sort of diving into the whole kind of idea of inspections, really, and why they matter. I mean, inspections are your way of differentiating. It can prove your excellence and kind of show you in your best light, and it can also work to your disadvantage, and of course it can be, if inspections don't go well, and they can lead to observations, or even in the worst cases detentions, which can cost thousands of dollars. So it's important to get them right, and today we're going to have a little look at that. And really, this is a chance. I've called it inspecting the inspector. We've got an inspector, we've got two people with inspection experience on the call this morning. Always good to hear their point of view, so that's the idea. And then we're going to look at some specially curated content, e-learning content that can help you and your team on board to prepare for inspection. So let me introduce our inspectors this morning. Our two speakers will be joining me for this, what we're calling a fireside chat. So first of all, we've got Hadyn Abbey, who's from Cambridge Maritime, and Andy Easdown, who's with us from our own consulting team. Andy and I have worked together many years, but I'll get them both to speak about their experience. So Hadyn, would you give us a quick introduction to yourself and to Cambridge Maritime?
Yeah, sure. My name's Hadyn Abbey, as Raal introduced me. I'm the operations director for Cambridge Maritime. My personal experience is I was at sea for over 3 decades before moving shoreside. I've been involved in quality assurance for 2 oil majors, and I'm currently working for Cambridge Maritime. I've been with them for 8 years. We are a one-stop shop for all inspections, whether that be pre-charter, pre-purchase, right the way through to audits, navigation, ISPS, ISM, and also SIRE 2.0 coming in.
Thanks very much. And we'll come back to some of that thing. I think people are very particularly interested in the SIRE 2 side of things. And then, Andy, you're no stranger to these webinars, but if you could give us a quick introduction.
Yes. Thanks, Raal. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Andy is down here. As Raal said, I'm working as a maritime consultant with Ocean Technology Group. My background is in naval architecture and marine engineering, and I was with Lloyd's Register for 28 years. So many of those years were actually as a surveyor, where I surveyed everything from fishing boats to super tankers, gas carriers, bulk carriers, cape size, the largest sizes in the world. So a lot of time that I spent carrying out inspections. So there are a lot of common themes that emerge no matter what the size of the vessel. And recently I was with Shell as the learning advisor for Shell Shipping and Maritime. And the last few years, I've been working as a consultant with Ocean Technology Group.
Cheers. Thanks, Andy. So let's get stuck straight into it. And I'm sure, as James said, there's plenty of questions there for everybody. So let's start off by talking about we can take the slides down. We can see more of these gentlemen's faces. James, if you just take that down. So let's talk about starting off there. What are the real key elements of a good inspection?
Well, for me, for the ship side, is preparation. As soon as you go on board ship, Are they presenting themselves well? I mean, right from the gangway or accommodation ladder to the accommodation, are you challenged at the top of the accommodation? Is the ISPS code being followed? Are they following their own processes and procedures? You know, it's almost like it's the initial handshake with the inspector. Does it go well? Are they prepared?
And from their point of view, how can they sort of find out what the the requirements of the inspection are going to be?
Well, they should be able to contact their DPA, look back at previous inspections on their checklists, any observations, have they been closed out? And it's just the preparation of what we expected. If they haven't got the checklist for an inspection, please contact the DPA, look in the SMS. They should have it parked somewhere in the system. If not, then the DPA team, Shoreside, should be able to send them, if not a checklist, then an aid memoir for preparation.
Thanks,
the other side I was going to mention there is that both SIRE 2.0 and the RISQ, the RightShip questionnaires, give very comprehensive information about what's expected during the inspection. So in a way, you're prompted, you know already what it is that the inspector is going to ask you about, what he's going to look for, what evidence he wants to see. So in terms of preparation, you now have all the elements. And similarly with classification, statutory surveys, there are checklists available which will highlight in detail exactly what the surveyor or inspector will be looking for. But I'd just like to reiterate the point that Hadyn made there about preparation. It really is the key, because you know immediately you walk on board whether a ship is prepared for your arrival or not. It's when you get to that position where you realize it's going to be a long day because they're not ready for you. And that's really one of the sort of worst parts of being a surveyor and inspector. When you know that it's going to be a difficult task to extract the information that you need for a successful inspection. And that's the other side of it, is as an inspector, you actually prefer and like the inspection to go well. I think perhaps the impression from the people on board ship is that, oh, here he comes, he's got to find a load of faults, you know, and it's invariably a he, so sorry, it could be a she. But here comes the inspector, they want to find a load of faults. But actually it's the opposite. We really want the ship to do well. We want the crew to perform to their best. And the key to that is that they've done good preparation. They know what inspection is being asked for. They know the areas that the inspector is going to look for, and they have everything ready. They've tested it. They've tried it. They've got the documentation ready. They're really properly prepared.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Hen.
No, go ahead, Raal.
No, I was just going to sort of zoom in a little bit onto what are the sort of challenges that a crew will face during an inspection. Then, if that's, you know, you're wanting them to do well, but what are the sort of things that might inhibit that?
And time. It's, you go on board some ships and they might have been given 1 week's notice. Some have been given 2 hours notice. You know, so the company aren't really playing fair in giving them time to prepare. For me, minimum time would be 10 days to a week. To let the vessel know there will be an inspector boarding at the next port, and this is what they'll be covering. At least then they have time to prepare, to get ready, either mentally or to issue the checklist to the various heads of department and to go through and make sure everything's lined up. I mean, you know, as Andy said, it's the inspectors on paid per observation that they find. It's really not a point scoring system. It's to go on board and just report on what is found. And as I said before, the preparation from the initial handshake at the gangway to going up into the conference room or the master's office, and all the paperwork's laid out in the right order. I mean, it sets the tone for the whole inspection.
And you know, Andy, you were saying there, and you know, things aren't always going to be perfect. There's going to be sort of complications at the berth potentially, and there may be people who are insufficient. What can you sort of do if you start to kind of feel as someone on board, you know, I'm getting off on the wrong foot here, or I'm getting what things aren't going perfectly. What's the sort of takeaway there?
Invariably, you start at the captain's cabin in the master's office, and a lot of the time you can gauge, if you like, how stressed the captain is because you're nearly always, as an inspector coming on board at the busiest time, there's always going to be cargo discharge or cargo loading. Invariably, there's a bunkering operation. There's a number of things that are going on all at the same time. And it might be that certain officers haven't had their sufficient hours of rest and so on. So one of the things which I used to find was very helpful was having that discussion with the master about the availability of the crew, when you're going to test something, whether there are any restrictions on doing certain operations at the berth, which sort of helps the master to sort of feel at ease. Okay, yes, we can adjust this schedule. It doesn't have to be done bang, bang, bang like this. We can move things around a little bit and so on. Plus, also the other side of things is we know the ship's not going to be perfect, and so one of the first questions is to ask what defects are there on board, and it's important that there's real honesty and transparency there, because one of the things that really does upset the inspectors is being told that everything's good, everything's fine, and then one thing after another fails to operate or isn't there, doesn't work, doesn't operate as it should do. And that really is a reflection that they haven't been honest and transparent, and that leads that sort of suspicious approach then to, well, they told me everything's okay, but it isn't. Now I've got to question everything. So you don't want to be in that position. So a good defect list which shows what's wrong and the actions that have been proposed to repair them. Usually there's correspondence with the shore to say, you know, that this has been ordered, these spare parts are in train, they're coming, they're arriving today, or we're going to pick them up at the next port or whatever. That gives the inspector confidence that things are actually being kept on top of, and that there's a proper system in place on board.
I mean, there's nothing more disheartening for an inspector to be told everything's fine, this is great, and then you start checking the paperwork and then see if it corresponds to the actual job, and you're going, no, this bears no semblance to the truth.
Mm. And coming,
so
just want to
dive only on that, but everything else you come across.
Yeah, sorry, there was a little glitch then, and I thought you'd stopped, and you were not. But I mean, just want to zoom in on that bit, because you mentioned it, Andy, the questions there, and obviously with SIRE 2.0 coming, there's much more emphasis on that interaction and that discussion. So when you're talking to the crew, what is the best way to answer the questions? What advice would you give to crew in terms of how they answer those questions?
Well, it's always good if they've practiced it first. So that would be the main thing that I would say is that ideally you're not in the position where the very first time that the crew member has heard the question is when the inspector asks it. The opportunity to
sorry, folks.
That's all right. It looks like we've got a few gremlins this morning. I think Andy's dipped out and a couple of times. I'm not quite sure.
But with regards to the best way to answer the question, that was the last thing I had, is transparency. Transparency, honesty, but be succinct. Only answer the question that's asked. Don't tell the inspector information you think he should know, but just answer the question. Otherwise, you could dig yourself into a pit that you really don't want to.
Is that because it kind of feels like it's a little bit too rehearsed, or a little bit like he's sort of, is that the kind of thing, like it might be covering something up? Yeah,
it could be rehearsed. It could be they've had a briefing the day before. If the inspector asks this is the answer to give. And it may not be the information we're actually asking for, but you've been prompted to tell him anyway. Yeah. We're not interested in that. Just answer the question succinctly. Fantastic. Transparency. We'll ask a question, you'll answer, and then we'll just ask for evidence and then move on.
Okay, good. Andy, you got dumped out of the room or something happened there.
Yes, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what happened there.
you were in mid-flow. Well, this is the reality of online meetings. Yeah,
I do apologise.
Did you were making a point around how to sort of speak and answer the inspector?
Yes, Hadyn's actually covered it there. Jumping in very nicely. Thank you, Hadyn. It really is important not to over elaborate, and get into too much discussion, because that can lead to other issues being exposed, which you don't really want to. Plus, the inspector's got a very defined schedule to work to. So much as nice as it would be to have a chat about general things, actually you've got to keep moving on and progressing the inspection.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you mentioned there just I don't want to dwell on this too much, but you did mention in there the role of the shore team and how the shore team actually supports that. And I think just could you just elaborate on that sort of shore, because there'll be a lot of people on the call this morning who are working in shore-based positions and who obviously want inspections to go well. So, what role can they play in achieving a good outcome?
I'll give that to you, Hadyn, first.
Firstly, I'd say identify what your compliance teams can do is all the inspections of that particular type, all the findings and observations they can share with you. So, the common findings in the fleet are as follows. So then they can use that as a checklist to go around and make sure everything's up to speed. But it's also supporting, as in, if a defect is reported and stores are required, give the ship a response. Because if we go on board and we see there's a defect, spares have been ordered, but there's been no response shoreside, all we can say is, yes, an email has been sent shoreside. Whether it's been actioned or not, or whatever, we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other element I would add there is particularly for the DPA, designated person ashore, is wherever possible to visit the ship, make yourself known to the crew, so that when the question asks, who the inspector asks who's the DPA, they actually may have even met the person. But the point there is that the DPA can go on and do a sort of mock audit or mock preparation for the inspection that's coming up, and a lot of the time that is part of the preparation process. So it's not just about the people on board the ship; it's about shoreside management going on board, going through things, looking at processes, looking at procedures, making sure that they're aligned with the SMS, and preparing the ship in terms of the kind of questions that will come up. Either it's a RightShip inspection, or it's a SIRE inspection, it's an ISM audit, it's just being prepared for any eventuality that comes up. And that's one of the best parts of the shore crew can.
One of the questions we asked in the opening meeting was when did the office personnel last visit the vessel, whether it be an engineering super or an ops super? When was the last time they actually came on board and engaged? Because it is a reflection on then how much management are concerned, but also how the time management shore and what value they put on that shoreside. Because we have a lot of companies where the guys shoreside don't particularly engage with the vessel unless something is wrong.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's not the way forward. They need that level of assurance by visiting the vessel and knowing that the SMS is being played out properly.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the different types of inspection there. Obviously, they're different. They're looking for different things. But is there anything that sort of particularly characterises them in terms of how you approach them as an inspector, Hadyn? You do all these different kind of things. Are they all essentially the same thing, working to slightly different criteria, or what kind of separates them, really?
They are. It's very much like everyone knows with ISM, it's say what you do and do what you say. It's making sure that correlation actually exists on board. Navigation, again, it's very much an audit on compliance with the SMS and are you putting best practice in. But they all underline with engagement with the crew on board. We can go through paperwork all day, every day. But unless we have that engagement with the crew and they are engaged with the process,
mm-hmm.
we can't get the feedback.
It's interesting, the point that you made there, Hadyn, about are you doing what you're saying you're doing? The trial inspections for SIRE 2.0, the key finding there that has come out so far is that the SMS does not align with actual onboard practice.
No, we've seen that quite a bit as well with ISM. They're doing they are recording what they think is correct and then doing what they want on board. It's that disconnect between the two processes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's an issue in that it also shows that the SMS hasn't been, if you like, regularly evaluated, updated, and really SMS should be thought of as if you like, a work in progress. It's not set in stone. If things change and you need to adjust the SMS, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's what you should be doing.
Exactly right. We often find on board that we have a look in the SMS and say, are you doing this? They say, oh, we know what the SMS says, but we find that this works better in practice.
I guess yeah,
happens more often than you'd like to think.
Yeah.
But then the next question is,
yeah,
what does your SMS say about the management of change?
Yeah.
Do you
I think one
change is?
Just giving my perspective on this as well, I think there's lots and lots of situations in there on board where a certain amount of improvisation is needed, dynamic risk assessments, things like that. And I think that's something that you look for as well, ability for teams to be able to adapt and to sort of do the right thing. That's why I'm quite excited by things like values-based behaviors and that kind of thing, because it's actually kind of imbuing people with the ability to just make the right thing, do the right thing, make the right decisions. We're sort of gravitating nicely across to sort of coming into the sort of training side of it and how you actually prepare for an inspection. So can we sort of dig into that? How important is training as far as that goes, and what kind of ways can you kind of officers on board and to a certain extent the shore side as well, how can they kind of help people to be ready to prepare and so on for inspections?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say is that a well-trained ship is a well-run ship, and it's really obvious the people who've received training and those that haven't. So we all know it can be a burden for people. They join the ship and they're given a huge list of training, mandatory training that they're expected to work through. So we should separate, if you like, the mandatory training from the actual on-the-job training which you receive. But the key point really is that with good training, you feel familiar, you feel like you know the job, you know what you're expected to do, you know what's supposed to happen. Whereas a lot of the time, people get left to their own devices on board and they do their best, but they're not absolutely sure that they're doing things the right way or in line with company procedures or processes. So training can help, it can guide people, it can direct them. It's not the answer to everything because you've got to have that onboard experience, but at least it feels a little bit familiar to them because they've seen it in training and then they can go and do it in practice. One of the best possible things that can be done is to use things like toolbox talks. And if you do have formal training sessions on board, which you should be having, to actually get people to encourage them to talk through the tasks themselves. And I think there's a terminology that Hadyn used when we were chatting the other day, reverse toolbox talk, so that you can actually have that discussion. Well, do you think that really is the best way? Is that what the procedure says? What could be the safety risks of doing that? So all those things are training, actually. They're not what we perhaps consider formal training, where you sit down in front of a computer or perhaps these days on your own device and go through a program. But they're all part of that training process. And the more familiar you become with your operations on board, if you like, the more the training supports for what you're doing. It helps you to get more job satisfaction as well. So I find it quite interesting that when we look at things like the Seafarers Happiness Index, actually receiving good training is right up there on the list of things that they actually want from a good employer, along with communication, obviously, and so on. But it's surprising that you'd think pay would be number one, but actually an employer that provides opportunities for development, read training, they score very highly in those kind of satisfaction surveys.
Thanks, Andy. Hadyn, what about your perspective on this? How do you kind of, where do you see training fitting in there, and how do you, what evidence are you looking for when you're on board that good training is in place? Good training regime.
Training is essential in preparation, not only for your professional life but for your personal life on board, because it removes elements of doubt from your work. A well-trained crew that are sure in their role, sure in their responsibilities, engages a lot more. And as Andy said, using toolbox talk from that sort of ground up perspective on assurance that I know what I'm doing, I'm professional, and that approach is fantastic. It does lead to a lot more engagement and buy-in on board into the work processes and procedures. But we also check things like CBT percentage, training percentage, personal training records on board. Are they being maintained properly? And you may take 2 or 3 training records out and then go and engage with those individuals and say, what can you tell me about this training? A good open-ended question, and let them fill the silence. And normally it comes back. There've been 1 or 2 ships where it hasn't reflected what has actually gone on. It's been a bit of a paperwork exercise. But for the vast majority, those who have a good training regime are better run ships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think as well, one of the things that sort of you were kind of, I think, I don't want to paraphrase what you were saying, Andy, but I think one of the things that common kind of things that I have in discussion with training managers and stuff like that is it's really about making that connection between the training and the real world task, and actually connecting those 2 things so that the person's actually understanding this isn't just something that you do and then you do the real world task. It's a bit like your point about the SMS, isn't it? You know, like, well, yeah, we learn what's in the SMS and we do something different. It's sort of the same with the sort of training side of things. If you actually see that connection and people can actually make that connection between the training benefiting their ability to excel in the job, then suddenly it starts to become much more kind of, you know, much more relevant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, and I've seen that pretty much all through my career, really. I mean, I've seen it with people that I've met as surveyors, and the thing that they most desperately want is training. They want to benefit from the experience of other people, and of course, most of the training programs which are around are, if you like, the distillation of best practice and experience over the years, all brought together in a training package. But yeah, it's such an important part of the overall performance of a company, and it's always been a matter of regret to me that pretty much when things go bad and costs start to be cut, training is almost one of the first things that's cut invariably, when in actual fact training is the bit that, if you like, will help the performance of the company, which will differentiate, as Hadyn said, between those companies which aim to be a top performer versus the compliance sort of mindset. You know, I'm only doing this training because I have to comply. But in reality, operational excellence is much more than just compliance. And it's interesting that it's been picked up in the SIRE 2.0 in the performance factors, the performance influencing factors, should I say, and the opportunity for people to show actually human performance which is above that which is expected for their rank, and it being recognized. I think that's the first time actually that's been done. And in the past, you probably met 1 or 2 of those people when you were going around doing your surveys and inspections on board. There's no way of actually recognizing it, other than perhaps having a quiet word with the chief officer or the captain at the end of the survey or inspection and saying, you know, your third was really good. He really knew his stuff. He was well prepared, and so on. And I always tried to do that. But now with SIRE 2.0, there's actually a formal mechanism. So yeah, that's very positive.
Yeah,
good.
I mean,
Sorry, Hadyn, go on.
It's the human element side of things is something a lot of people have been pushing for a long time, because ships can be built, but people operate them. Mm-hmm. You know, it's for a lot of companies, it's the greatest asset and sometimes overlooked. But it's about time to embrace the people. And, you know, with regards to training, sometimes that's a great indicator of how the culture is on board with the company. Yeah. Both regards to safety and their approach to the human element and looking after their own people.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing. And that's one of the areas that's actually developing. I don't want to digress too far, but I think when I look at training schedules across the board of what people are using, and it's moving from that position of sort of, you know, just covering off all of the kind of safety basics or whatever, to actually what other training is being done to kind of facilitate the kind of right culture on board the ship, which is then leads to all these other benefits as well. I'm going to pick up on a couple of points you made there, Andy, because actually in a couple of minutes, because you said about the training budget being cut, and that's one of, you know, that is definitely something that I've experienced to my detriment over the years. But one of the other things that's really interesting is that when people haven't, you know, you go in sometimes and people are looking to cut the training budget down, the minute there's an incident, they're throwing the money at you. What can you do? What training can we put in place now? And this is something that I'm actually going to show in a second in the sort of the data actually shows some interesting things that when you start to look at inspection data. So I think that was kind of like one of the areas that I wanted to get into. It's very disconcerting that people keep popping off. I'm glad I've got two of you, because at least one of you
working as a tag team
to answer the question.
On that point, there's the famous quote after the BP Texas City disaster, when someone said a lot of companies approach safety and training as if it's expensive. It's nothing compared to the price of an accident.
Yeah, but even when you look at it, even the detention figures, if you're detained in port by a day, and the implications of that, even if you can make up that day in the fuel that you'll spend, the expenditure on fuel to kind of make up for that, the numbers become mind-boggling very, very quickly. And whereas when you look at the investment in training, obviously, but then, I would say that, right? Hopefully people won't be too cynical about that. So with that in mind, look, I'm really conscious that I'm just going to have a quick look and see kind of questions we've got, and there's a lot in there, so I'm kind of keen that we kind of move towards the Q&A. But before we do, I just want to talk about some potential solutions and give you a couple of perspectives and on that. So I think, James, can you bring back the slides, and I'll just there we go, he's doing it right now. So obviously, we were talking about having a good training regime on board the ship, and evidence and things like that of it. So obviously, a lot of our customers on the call today who have the Ocean Learning platform and the Ocean Learning library, and but what one of the things I wanted to say about that is that obviously that is a way of recording on board all of the training activity that's going on and being able to present it and all of that sort of stuff. One of the issues with it is that there's with it sort of having this huge kind of, not everybody's got a huge library, but we've got a big library of like 800 training titles plus. And so although a company won't necessarily have all of those, but when they're picking and choosing, it's hard for them to gravitate towards necessarily knowing what the best things are to use. And that's where I'm going to go with this. But before we do, I just want to talk about some of the interesting things we're doing by taking some publicly available PSC data and overlaying it with the training, because I think it supports some of the things that have come up in the conversation today. So the first thing is, James, if you just run through a lot of customers on the call, one of the interesting things that we can see is that actually in terms of the performance of the data, we can actually see a differential between our customer cohort and the rest of the shipping world out there. Now, that should give those customers on the call a little bit of confidence. I'm not saying we can take the credit for that. That's not necessarily proving causality of these things is very difficult. But across such a big number of vessels, it's interesting that we can see this is data from last year. I haven't run it from the same time this year, but the deficiency rates considerably lower and the detention rates considerably lower. Now, as I was saying, I'm not going to say we can take the credit for that, but it's interesting that these customer cohort that have put in place a training regime, a platform, and means of being able to run a good training regime on board are showing these kind of differentials. The second point I want to make, if you could go to the next slide, James, and just whiz through, there's a bit of a slide build here, but as I'm not steering it, it's just going to drive everyone crazy. It's about actually making sure that you are focused on the right things as far as your inspection performance is concerned. So what we've done with this is we've zoomed in sort of customer by customer, and we can see where are the deficiencies coming up, where are the observations, and what's the training kind of connection here. So James, if you just sort of click through. So here we go. So these are sort of an example here of topics in which there's sort of observations of a specific company were coming up. And then when we look at the, so you got like fire safety there and ISM, two sort of issues there that have cropped up in the inspections. But when you look at the training data and where they're focusing, another couple of clicks and we should be there, James. There we go. So you can see here, it's quite difficult to read that data. So I'll just make the point simply that what you can see is that often where the biggest defects are, there's not actually a sort of a training, kind of preemptive training element in place. And so it's really, when you start to look at that data, and Hadyn, you made that point, what can the shore be doing? Well, they can be looking at what's happening around the fleet. You can look at some of those patterns, and could be particular trade routes, particular things that you're going into where certain things are getting picked up. And this then enables you to then say, well, can I repoint my training strategy a little bit? The last point I want to make is, if you go to the next slide, is looking at the link between what's happening in the kind of audit situation and the training behavior. And this one is super important, super interesting, sorry, in terms of what's actually happening here. Because what you're seeing there in the middle there is the sort of the internal audit, looking let's call it an incident for now, the audit report there being a negative. And what you can see is that training behavior is following exactly the same thing. So the incident happens, the training falls off, an incident happens, and then the training starts again, and we start to see that. And when you zoom out on that further, you will see it's like a series of little mountain peaks. So that's kind of an example of sort of reactive, where just taking a reactive approach to training and then not being consistent and not following it through is going to kind of give you that sort of ongoing issue. So, and we're seeing this appear in various places. This isn't just unique to one company. And this is something that we're doing more and more of. Obviously, there is some available data, other inspection data is not available. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, I said about sort of getting into some solutions with the Q&A in mind. I just want to dive into one of the solutions that we've had. So I mentioned big library, need to kind of choose and collate some topics and stuff like that. So James, if you hit the first one, let's first look at what we've done as far as SIRE is concerned. Now, Andy, you've taken a dive into the library and effectively sort of curated a section of the library with a view to helping out with SIRE.
Yes. So as you'll see with the video running in the background there, essentially what we've SIRE question libraries and looked at the areas which are, if you like, causing the most difficulties, and pulled together a number of programs, 20 for each of the different ship types. So there's sort of 15 core and then 5 which are specific to that particular ship. So in this case, it's tankers, gas carriers, and chemical vessels. Obviously, chemical vessels have slightly different requirements, so the titles are curated towards that particular type of vessel. But also, if you like, interestingly, showing you the data that you showed there earlier, because I haven't seen that slide for a while, but the titles which are the most used. So these are the ones which help the companies to achieve the best performance. So we know from our internal data at Ocean the number of times those training programs have been accessed. So, and we can then link that to the ones which will provide the most help. Now, a lot of customers will have already got those, but this is aimed at people who aren't really sure what they should be doing. It's to help them to make sure that they've got the right kind of programs. And then there's a very small number of ones which we know cause some difficulty, but aren't widely used. So coming back to your point there about with the areas where the problems are, cybersecurity being one of those areas where actually we know that we should be doing more, so we're just highlighting that that's a very good one, a very helpful one for people to use.
So I think it's worth mentioning, isn't it? There's a lot of core stuff which is not in here because you're expecting that core stuff to be in place already. This is additive. This is on top for those, and we've mapped it, specific to rank and stuff like that. So from there's a possibility of this as well plugging straight into requirements and taking care of that, for you, sort of a concierge service, a little bit of that kind of thing, if you like.
Yeah.
So and then so SIRE specific, and then looking at some things that support the kind of the questions that are in SIRE and so on, and obviously by some specializations in there for the different tanker types.
Yes, and each one's mapped to a particular area of SIRE 2.0 as well. So whether it's sort of navigation or whether it's engine room or whatever, it's all there. so that you can
Very
see which areas are going to apply to. And the same with RISQ, with the RightShip area.
Let's move on to look at that, James, if you just, thank you. So let's talk about RightShip.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's, you know, I've watched RightShip grow over probably the last 20 years or so, from people wondering, well, what was RightShip all about, to the situation we're in now, where really RightShip is the de facto standard that's being applied to bulk carriers, general cargo vessels, etc. And so again, the same kind of process. There's an enormous questionnaire which everybody's expected to follow, and each one of the titles that have been suggested are mapped to a specific question. Now, as you said, Raal, there's in the Ocean Library, there's actually 800 titles, more than 800 titles. So for somebody coming fresh to it, to try and decide, well, what do I need? That could be quite tricky. So again, with the RightShip offering, it's about finding those ones which are going to be the most use and the most benefit. And each one, again, is mapped against particular questions, so that people know, okay, this is relevant to that area of the questionnaire, and so on. Again, divided by ship type, divided by rank, so that you can make sure that the appropriate people and do that training as well.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, it might be sort of a little bit confusing to some of you, because we did a bigger exercise on RightShip requirements, and it comes to about 150 titles or something, actually, that contributed. So we're not changing our mind about that. It's just we're trying to make this a little bit more manageable, so that it's a kind of a smaller core bundle of stuff. But of course, if you want to go further, there are plenty of examples of where you could take it further. Same is true of RightShip, SIRE, and same is actually true of sort of broader TMSA performance. You know, there's a lot of things you could add in. So we're focusing in here on some really core stuff, and then allowing, we're trying to make it as possible as common denominator to everybody, obviously with the split of the different vessel types and what have you as well. So you mentioned there, it's mapped to ranks, it's mapped to requirements. The way that these bundles work as well, it is possible for us to actually, as I say, plug those in. So it's not just like adding those titles into your library, but it's actually kind of providing a set of requirements specific to individuals. But I don't want to get too far into that at the moment. That's sort of more of a technical discussion. But it does highlight that if you're interested and you do want to follow up on looking at bringing these bundles into your libraries, do let us know early, because there will be a sort of an implementation element to that if you want to take advantage of the requirements, and that may form a bit of a queue there. So let us know. Last kind of thing I wanted to make a point around is that as well as these bundles, we do actually also have partner content which can help. So outside of the bundles, but I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about that. So James, if you just hit the next screen for us, this is an example of some content that we've taken in from a partner called NavGuide Solutions. They develop this content. It's nothing to do with us, and it takes a different approach, really. This is much more kind of hands-on. It's much more kind of a bit of a walkthrough from some of those elements of an inspection that you're working through. So it's actually, as you can see in the example up on the screen, it's actually kind of walking you through what the different elements are, the things that you should be looking at. So, and there's lots and lots of different examples of that. The other area that they've sort of zoomed in on, which I thought was quite interesting, is looking at the conversations with the inspector themselves. And we mentioned that a couple of times there. And this is quite a kind of fun idea that it sort of walks you through this kind of interactive discussion with where you're choosing the different options. You can see the different elements there of how that person responds to the inspector. So there's a huge number of titles there. Isn't time to go into all of them this morning, but they've developed, so there's about 220 modules, there's about 12 different subject areas, and then there's those scenarios that I mentioned as well that you can go through. The benefit here is obviously it's their content, but we're making it available as a distributor through our platform. So there is obviously a cost, we've got to pay them. But if you want and you're interested in doing that, it's then possible to augment that and put that content side by side with some of the things that we're talking about today and building out your training matrices. That's about it from the kind of sales pitch side of things. So let's get back into the Q&A. But yeah, let's see what questions we've got. We've got about 15 minutes, so that should be enough time to address some of those. Where shall we begin? James, are there any obvious ones we could start with, or everybody can see those on the right? As usual, everyone's put the questions in the chat rather than the Q&A. So let's have a little look. I'm just going to pick one to get the ball rolling. So we've got Peter here. One of the challenges faced are when the auditor inspector's attendance coincides with other inspection surveys like classes, flag state owners, owner's representative inspection. In the case of time planning and scope of inspection, including defects identified, discussion with the vessel's crew is quite challenging. Any good ideas to tackle such a situation?
Well, that's up to the shore-based managers to manage the number of people on board and the workload on the vessel. You know, it's no use scheduling, well, the ship's coming to Europe, let's get all the inspections done. You know, all you're doing is doubling or trebling the amount of work or pressure on the crew. And not only in preparation, but actually on the day, when they should be paying attention to things like the cargo work, ongoing operations, whether that be bunkering, storing, crew change, whatever. It's the inspectors are aware they're arriving at the worst time, but it's something that really shoreside should be able to manage a lot better than they actually do.
You're right, Hadyn, that it really is a shoreside issue to make sure that all of those items aren't scheduled at the same time. But, you know, we live in the real world and unfortunately these things do happen. And it makes life difficult for everybody, not just the shipboard crew, but for the inspector as well. But one of the things that I have found helps a little bit with that is that you agree the program with the master. You say, you know, we need a dedicated officer for this particular aspect, and then you agree the time schedule, if you like, where you can have those. So, for example, the chief won't be available until later on this afternoon, so we defer everything to the afternoon for talking to the chief, you know, or the first officer is only available for an hour. You know, what are you going to cover with the first officer before he has to go off and do something else? So it really is about the sort of, if you like, going along with it and trying to prepare and have those discussions up front, because it's very frustrating. You know, somebody could have been waiting for the inspector to come along, and you know, they're ready to go, but the inspector's tied up with somebody else. So it's important that sort of communication on board about and an opening meeting is really helpful, where you make that you have that discussion, you decide what's going to be done when and with whom, and that's really the only way that you can handle it.
It is, and a lot of that we take care of in.
It's like we've got a bit of a connection problem there, and Hadyn's dropped out. Andy, this one you can probably answer then while we're waiting for Hadyn to return. With RightShip, I've got one here, question from Neil Dorado. RightShip 3 requests certain formal training to be carried out. Do your titles satisfy RightShip requirements?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one, because we feel that they do, but occasionally we get feedback from RightShip that they would prefer manufacturer or shore-based training. So we're always in discussion with them about what is acceptable, because our approach is that if the flag considers our training acceptable, then it should be acceptable to RightShip. And one of the issues is that, for example, with let's take hatch covers. Hatch covers are really individual to the ship, and the manufacturer of the hatch cover doesn't want people messing about with his beautiful hatch covers, because he then can't guarantee that they'll seal correctly and so on. So of course he wants to emphasize that you should receive training from him. So in the case of RightShip, we've had that discussion with them. Training is acceptable, but there is if you like, a benefit, a positive side of, you know, if you can have the manufacturer training. But a lot of the time, it's a discussion that we're having with RightShip about this.
Yeah, it's an ongoing dialogue. I think is looking at those dimensions there. I mean, what RightShip are interested in really is the quality of the training happening and all that sort of stuff. And I think the so yeah, if that's an element of that is manufacturer training, then they may specify that. If part of that demands a simulator or something like that, then that's a different matter, isn't it? But yeah, so it's and we're not suggesting that RightShip are endorsing these packages. What we're doing is we're saying this is the requirement and this is the knowledge that you need to do well in that requirement. That's essentially
exactly. Yeah.
Another question here, one for you, perhaps, Hadyn. Could you please provide guidance on effectively managing third-party inspections, particularly PSC inspectors? Some feedback from our vessels indicates they haven't always been given the opportunity to fully explain their perspectives. Your insights would be greatly appreciated.
That's down to the inspector, unfortunately, and the culture that they actually come from, their business culture within their company. We always go on board, we'll ask a question, we'll receive an answer, then ask for evidence. If somewhere along the line that doesn't match up, we'll sit down and have a conversation. But it will be a dialogue, not a monologue. We are open to reason. We are open to proof, as long as it's sort of an honest approach and not just, well, I don't agree with that. That's going to cost me my bonus, which we hear more and more. But as long as they can justify the evidence, it's fine. We'll accept it. If it is a defect, as long as it's not a critical equipment, and they can say the spares have been ordered, and we see that, and we see a response from the office, it's in hand, it's being managed. I
think the other element is that with PSC, and I've experienced this myself. Sometimes the PSC inspector doesn't want to listen. They've got a particular area of focus that they're looking at. But there is the possibility, perhaps not right at that moment, but there is the possibility to discuss that with the senior authorities of PSC, because it can be seen, that certain ships go to a certain location and they're always detained, and actually that's not how it's meant to be. That's not how it works. So there have to be higher level discussions at the company level with the PSC regime. To try and work out, well, what can be done. And often it's down to an individual inspector. And unfortunately, if you come across one that's like that, as a crew member, it's very difficult. It's very hard for you to actually do anything about that. But then you raise that matter with your shore management, and they raise that matter with the PSC regime.
It's for shore management to follow up. I mean, more and more we're hearing stories from ships or recounting tales of PSC inspectors coming on board with very little sea time.
Yeah.
So we try to explain a situation to them, and they don't have that depth of knowledge or experience to understand what people are saying. But it is a question of try not to get into an argument with them on board, try not to get into a heated exchange, just sort of nod and say, I don't agree with it, but thank you very much for your input, and then fire it off to your head office. It's up to them to follow up with Port State.
Yeah, there's just going through while you're talking there, going through a lot of the different questions and comments. There's a lot of stuff in there, I think, about inspectors and not listening, and particularly looking at different regimes and stuff like that. So it's clearly a bit of an issue for people. One of the questions here, which is kind of interesting, is I'm just going to try and find it. There's kind of a few points, I suppose, about the kind of the issue about time and having the time on board to prepare, and sort of looking at that as the training side of things, and how can they make time for doing those kind of trainings? Any perspectives on, there's a couple there questions saying, well, how much time really should a company be putting across for people to go through CBT training and that kind of thing? I mean, there isn't really a one size fits all answer, is there?
No, it's the unfortunate answer of it depends. It depends on the trade. It depends on your number of crew. It depends on your workload. But it also depends on the company culture. If they put a value on it, they may turn around and say every crew member or every person on board has 2 hours of work time a week to do CBT. Whether you draw up a timetable on board then and allot it, that's fine because it's work, it's a requirement. Or if they say you will do it on your own time, there has been studies into this, that if it's allotted work time, they'll do it a lot more readily than if it's, in your personal time, go and do this.
Yeah. And it comes back to that graph that you showed earlier, Raal, that the importance of training is suddenly elevated when there's an incident, and then, people will focus on it more. But in general, the sort of rule of thumb is that someone new to a position is going to spend quite a bit more time training, and then that gradually sort of tapers away. But the importance is that it shouldn't go to zero. As Hadyn said, there should be time allotted. There's always something that you can do either to refresh yourself, refresh your knowledge about a particular area.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the time you studied something when you're at college, and you don't actually look at it until there's a problem. So it's very helpful if you've got time to actually go through and look at the training on board, because actually that process of refreshing your mind about something can really help you when you're working on board.
And I think just the point I'd make to that as well is that we are moving into an era, as I see it, where much more of that kind of just-in-time training is going to be necessary. You're undertaking new jobs, you need to do training. But so this is the real benefit of having, as many on the call have, the access to things like the training app to be able to kind of get that content where it's needed, sort of thing, and get things out fairly quickly as well. Just one question that I think is kind of interesting here is where someone's saying, basically the message is, if the vessel's supposed to be safe and compliant with the convention requirements, why should a special preparation be necessary for an port state control inspection, or I guess any inspection?
It's true. I mean, it's one of the questions that was asked in a company when I was sailing at the end of every safety meeting was, are we ready for an inspection? Yeah. Didn't matter what inspection it was, but are we ready? And hopefully the answer to that was always yes, because if you sent it one no, you got the superintendent on the phone. But it's a question of, can you always polish?
Yeah.
And it always come across as more professional. And a lot of the time, the answer is yes. And it does no harm at all in taking a step back and looking with fresh eyes at your own system on board. Self-evaluate. You can do your own gap analysis and close them.
Yes, exactly. And with the best will in the world, the complexity of a vessel, the sheer volume, if you like, of requirements that you're expected to comply with, that's a really, yes, you're ready, and you should be ready at all times. That's the perfect position to be in, so that no preparation is needed. But the reality of it is that with the time pressures that people face, with the fact that things, do go wrong, that things do expire, if you like, things always have to be maintained and looked after. There's nearly always something which isn't working. There's nearly always something which could be better. There's crew changes. What was known by one person when they were on board isn't known by the new person who comes on board. Yeah. So you mustn't make assumptions that just because everything seems to be running okay, that same level is, has been maintained all the way through.
That anecdotally as well over the years has been a major point in when the training regime starts to go south, actually, when you see handovers, not being done properly and stuff like that. Suddenly somebody that may not even know, the new person may not even know they're responsible for certain things in terms of getting it. So we see maybe like they've not sent any training records in for a month, and then you query it, look into it, and then you find out, the new person didn't know anything about it. There's an element of reboarding that might be needed there as well. So, it can be tricky. One question here, which I'd be quite honest, I'm not 100% sure I fully understand it. But you guys may. So do you see any difference in effectiveness of training and the country of COC? So I guess it's sort of around like, where, depending on where the COC was issued, maybe that quality of the seafarer or something. I don't know if that's what they mean exactly, but does it make sense to you, that question?
To be honest with you, since STCW came in, I don't think there's a direct correlation between nationality or where they got their COC to receptiveness to training. It's still all very individualistic.
Yeah, everybody wants training. What maybe the thing that I've experienced is that it's the English language, actually. That's the issues, not their capability. Intellectually, they're more than capable, and they want training, and they will lap up any training that's given to them. But actually, it's the English language training that they really need, so that they can express themselves when they're in front of the inspector.
Yeah. Good. I haven't done much in the way of good timekeeping here because we've hit the hour, and I didn't sort of close things up. And I can see people saying, "Oh, thank you, I've got to go." So I will just kind of just say a few points here. I'm not going to shut the door on everything, but I just want to make sure that as follow up, you will get a survey sent to you for coming through. We would really like it if you fill it in. It helps us to improve. It helps us to get better. If you are interested in following up on unlocking any of the content bundles or the new content that I mentioned there, get in touch with us, and we can sort of register your interest and discuss that a little bit further as well. All of the questions we have a log of, so if there's anything in there we see, I know there's some specific questions about do we follow exact RightShip requirements and stuff like that. We can get back to you with some clarity on those points as well. And keep watching this space, keep seeing the different subjects and stuff we're covering. Let us know what you want to hear about as well. Please don't be shy in telling us what we can do better. And it just remains for me to thank the guests here today, Hadyn Abbey from Cambridge Maritime. Thank you very much. Andrew Easdown, our own SME. Thank you so much for joining. And thank you all for coming. And I hope you enjoyed it. And with that, I'll say thanks very much and good day.